Hello everyone. I recorded this video as an example of a sample human rights case study oral presentation for you to use as a guide for your upcoming assignments. In this video, I've recorded a sample of what your oral presentation could look like, and I stopped throughout the way to give a breakdown on each section with some tips on what it might include, approximately how long it should be. At the end of the video, be sure to stick around because I give myself a grade for my oral presentation, so you'll certainly want to see that. First off, we'll start with the introduction. So just a couple of visual tips for your video. You want to pick a clean, non-distracting background. People watching your video should be focused on you, not on what's going on behind you. It should be a well-lit area, it should be quiet, there shouldn't be any interruptions. In the introduction, you want to give a brief description of the topic. Try to come up with something to grab the viewer's attention. This should take about 15 to 30 seconds.
Hello. Today I'll be presenting a human rights case study, the story of Myrna Mack, a Guatemalan citizen who was murdered in 1990 as a result of her research and activism into that country's long and bloody civil war.
After you introduce the case, you'll want to provide the background. Provide some context for the country or the region where the case took place, and describe the case history up to the point when it was pursued as an actual human rights case. You want to spend about 2 to 3 minutes on this section, and you'll note that when I move from section to section in my presentation, I indicate what I'm going to be talking about each section. This will help your audience know what's coming up.
First, a bit of background. From the 1970s to 1980s, Guatemala went through a dirty war, during which 440 villages were destroyed, 200,000 people were killed or disappeared, and 1 million people were displaced as a result of armed conflict between the government and leftist guerrilla groups. By the mid-1980s, the military campaign had come to an end, and a democratic government was installed in Guatemala. Myrna Mack Chang was a Guatemalan citizen born to a Chinese mother and a Mayan father. She studied anthropology in the United Kingdom and returned to Guatemala to found the Association for the Advancement of Social Sciences in Guatemala, which studied the effects of the Civil War on the rural population. Her research publications highlighted the extreme poverty and violence suffered by internally displaced indigenous people in Guatemala. In 1990, Myrna was stabbed 27 times and left for dead by members of the Estado Mayor Presidencial, or the EMP, which was a hit squad, a government-run hit squad developed during the Civil War. Myrna's sister, Helen Mack, took up her cause and pursued the case to ensure that justice would be done for her sister. The initial police investigation was shoddy and very little evidence was collected. There was initially a 60-page report by police which stated that the murder was politically motivated and identified a police sergeant as the assailant. However, an abridged 13-page version is what was eventually given to the courts, which said that Myrna died in a robbery. One police detective decided to testify about the full report, but he was also murdered. Eventually, the full report was released after much effort by Helen's sister, and the Army sergeant who stabbed Myrna was convicted for murder in 1993. However, Helen knew that this murder had been ordered by officials higher up in the EMP, so she pursued charges against a general and 2 colonels within the Guatemalan military who were the intellectual authors of the murder. However, the Guatemalan courts declined to try any of these individuals.
The next section of your presentation should cover the relevant human rights law. Here, you'll mention and describe 2 or 3 pieces of human rights law that are the most relevant to your case. Also, during this section, I want you to include a pop-up link as an annotation on your YouTube video that gives the readers an ability to click to go to the relevant human rights law that you're referencing. You should spend 30 to 90 seconds on this portion of your presentation.
So what is the relevant human rights law in this case? First, Article 3 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. Obviously, being murdered by the hands of your government is a violation of this right. Furthermore, however, Article 8 states that everyone has the right to an effective remedy by the competent national tribunals for acts violating the fundamental rights granted him by the Constitution or by law. The Guatemalan government's resistance to trying the intellectual authors of her murders therefore constituted a violation of Article 8 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Next, you'll talk about how the case was resolved. Mention whatever human rights enforcement mechanisms or bodies were invoked, how they became involved, and how the actual case was resolved. Spend 1 to 2 minutes on this section.
So what were the relevant human rights enforcement mechanisms and how was the case resolved? At the same time that Helen was pursuing charges locally, she also took the case to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. The case was taken up by the IACHR in 1996 due to the railroading by the local Guatemalan government. And they stated that all local remedies had been exhausted and were not getting anywhere. The IACHR referred the case to the Inter-American Court. The Inter-American Court found in favor of Helen and ordered Guatemala to do several things in their resolution. First, they required the Guatemalan government to admit guilt in the murder of Myrna Mack, to investigate the crime, to train military and police in human rights, to provide reparations to Myrna's next of kin, and to establish a scholarship in Myrna's honor and build a memorial. In 2002, the 3 officers from the Guatemalan military finally went on trial. One of the colonels was found guilty. The other 2 figures were acquitted. The Inter-American Court provided periodic monitoring through 2014 and found that Guatemala had met all of its obligations to the ruling, except that it had only partially adjudicated the case because only one of the 3 figures was found guilty.
Finally, you'll discuss implications and important questions that arose from the case. When talking about implications, discuss how this case has affected the country or the region, and what implications might this case have on the future of human rights law. Finally, you'll discuss 1 or 2 important questions that this case study raised for you personally.
So what are the implications of this case and what are some questions to ponder for the future? First, this case exposed Guatemala's human rights violations and atrocities from their 1970s to 1980s civil war on the national and international stage, and it helped, among many other factors, to lead to government reform and transparency, which are efforts that continue in Guatemala today. Secondly, it set the precedent that states have the institutional responsibility for state actors at any level, so whether that's the federal government or local military officials who are involved in human rights violation. Third, it set a precedent of Inter-American Court jurisdiction over countries who are not adequately filling their responsibilities under Article 8 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to provide remedies to violations against their citizens. And finally, it demonstrated that the Inter-American Court is willing to follow up on cases. However, a major pressing question that it brings to the fore is just how practical is the IAC for the everyday citizen. As we can see in this case, Myrna Mack was murdered in 1990, yet her murderers did not go on trial until 2002. Furthermore, Myrna Mack was a highly educated individual, and her sister was highly educated and well-connected also. This gave her the ability to pursue the case that many of the 200,000 Guatemalans who were killed during the Civil War simply did not have. So ultimately, while this case shows promise that the Inter-American Court is an effective human rights enforcement mechanism, there's still much work to be done to ensure that everyday ordinary citizens can receive protection for their basic human rights. Thank you.
So, How did I do? I'll walk you step by step through the rubric that I will use to grade your presentations. First of all, I did successfully upload the video on YouTube, so that's 20 out of 20 points. The video quality was just fine. I'm not looking for an Oscars quality production here, but it was well lit. There was a clean background. The audio was clear and easy to hear. 10 out of 10 points. For quality and professional delivery, I gave myself 10 out of 15. There's a couple things I could have done to improve this grade. Number one was a little bit more professional dress. Talking about a human rights case, so professional dress might have been a little bit more appropriate attire than the flannel shirt I was wearing. Also, while I did, use good cadence in talking and pause and look up and make eye contact, I think I spent a little bit too much time reading from my notes, and that was pretty apparent to me when I went back and watched this video. Having better rehearsed my delivery could have helped to improve this part of the grade. I did successfully include a pop-up link, so that was 5 out of 5 points. For the introduction, I gave myself 3 out of the 5. I did give a brief summary so people would know what I was talking about, but I really didn't do anything that would grab the audience's attention and draw them in and make them want to watch the rest of this video. My content on the background, the relevant human rights law, and case resolution was all pretty solid. I think I did a good job of covering the facts of the case, so I gave myself 10 out of 10 in each of those 3 sections. For interpretation, I gave myself 12 out of 15. I think I did a good job of discussing the implications of the case, and I raised an important question. But some things I could have done to improve. Number one, when I talked about the implications, I could have given an example of perhaps another human rights case more recently that cited the Myrna Mack case. As an influence, that would have definitely been a bonus. And also, while I brought up a discussion question, I didn't really dig too deeply on my personal interpretation of what that meant. So I could have gone a little bit further there and maybe got a couple more points. All in all, I gave myself a 90. So barely squeaked in at an A, but certainly room for improvement, and I'll look forward to seeing your final products.